Everyone, happy Wednesday afternoon. If you guys are watching us live, welcome to Manufacturing Hub. Super excited to go talk about ICS cybersecurity and how to get started and go talk to Gavin about all of his fun, interesting experiences, at least as many that we can possibly talk about live on stream. So super excited for that, you guys. If the first episode you're joining for, absolutely a fun episode to do so. Before we go ahead and jump in, we have 5 weeks before Vlad and I will be back together in California at ICC. For our podcast listeners, it was just an absolute look of fear that Vlad has to go hang out with me in person in 5 weeks again. It's his like twice yearly penance for something that he's done terribly in the past. Is that 2 or 3 times a year he's got to go hang out with me live in person for the entire week, and 5-ish weeks from now is going to be that. If you guys want to hear more about ICC, if you want to learn a little bit more about the Ignition 8.3 beta, go check out our episode last week. We had Kevin McCluskey on, where we barely got into any of the topics, but it was an absolutely fantastic conversation. So we had Kevin on last week, and I did see in an email earlier today that the Ignition 8.3 is officially going to launch as an LTS, as a long-term stable, on September 16th, which is the first Tuesday of ICC, which means that Tuesday will be absolutely super busy. And so that should be fun, and it'll give everyone something to talk about. If you guys are new here, welcome. If you've been here before, welcome back. Especially if you're new here, every Wednesday, Vlad and I get to go have a fun conversation, much of the time with other practitioners in the space, as we do with Gavin. If you guys have questions or thoughts or comments on ICS cybersecurity or any of the topics that you want to go talk to, please go ahead and drop them in the chat. We will do our very best to go ahead and pull them into the chat as they come live and go bring them into the conversation. But everyone, and without further ado, officially welcome to Manufacturing Hub. This is episode 228. My name is Dave. This guy up top is Vlad, and we want to welcome Gavin onto Manufacturing Hub for the first time. Gavin, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for taking the time. I was going to make a quick note for some of us. It is Thursday morning, very early morning in Gavin's perspective.
It's tomorrow.
That's right. That's right. Before we dive into ICS and, all the topics we do want to discuss today, Gavin, could you give us an overview of your background, your career, and ultimately what it is that you do today?
Yeah, sure. So basically, as a teenager, I started out as an operator. So, working the plant. I always grew up with a computer. My dad was a bit tech savvy in, 80s and 90s. So I was studying IT when I wasn't on shift. How to build like NT4 and Windows 2000 servers and that sort of stuff. And I found this really, really niche thing called cybersecurity that I was like, oh, wow, this is pretty cool. And then there were no jobs like for cybersecurity, like it just wasn't a thing. So I accidentally became an industrial automation engineer or control system engineer, programmed mostly Rockwell PLCs, a bit of Schneider, a bit of Mitzi, and then jumped over to the UK, did that for a bit and switched over to operational technology cybersecurity when I realized that the OT experts knew less than me about these things. So I was like, oh, I guess I'm an expert now. Basically switched to that, came back to New Zealand and have been doing OT cybersecurity for a while, which basically entails architectural design, policies, procedures, and sort of like risk management, GRC, governance, risk and compliance. So I sort of do the whole thing, like build like SCADA servers, design them and integrate them with other services to actually highlighting what your risks are and how you mitigate against them in a documented procedure. So
gotcha. Let me ask you a follow-up on that side in terms of verticals, right? And I'm assuming obviously a lot of your knowledge is applicable to, oil and gas, food and bev, CPG. Are you focused on any specific verticals or it's just a broad spectrum of projects?
Normally what you'll find is anything to do with energy and oil and gas, they have the money to spend on this stuff. When you move down the stack to like water and waste, we all know there's like no budget. So that sort of comes in a little bit. And then manufacturing side, you're starting to see it, but normally something has happened in IT or a CISO. Sorry, New Zealand, we call them CISOs. In the rest of the world, they're called CISOs, Chief Information Security Officer. It's just one of those weird cultural lingo things. But yeah, they've moved from one company to another, and they're like, this is actually important. We need to do something about this. So the awareness is definitely getting out there. But what typically happens when I get engaged is they're like, we want you to do OT cybersecurity stuff. And I'm like, cool. And then here's a proposal. And then they're like, you gods, can you do it for like 10% of the price? And it's like, not really, no. It's just the realities of things. So it's getting tough out there. But I will say this, the community has grown, and information and availability for people to do stuff on their own is grown astronomically. Very different from like a 2012 to a 2025. Like asset owners can do a bit of research and get some basic stuff in place and do that themselves, or system integrators. I think the system integrators are probably going to upskill in the next like decade so that they actually start doing stuff more and more, less so than the IT department. That's my perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me, I guess, ask you maybe a follow-up, because I ultimately don't want to assume that all the listeners are familiar with the topic of ICS or OT cybersecurity. I guess, could you paint us a picture as to, you mentioned SCADA servers, but ultimately there's a lot more components to it than that. So I guess I'm curious if you could paint us a picture maybe of what you would call ICS, maybe as a slightly broader topic, and then OT cybersecurity, and what does that actually touch on the platform?
Yeah, this is one of those great things where you're like, what is OT, what is ICS? And it's like depends on what organization, what terminology they want to think. So the way I typically describe it, because there is no standard way to describe it, but I describe it like this: operational technology includes things like a domain controller for control system. So domain controller like Active Directory stores like usernames and passwords, so people can log in with the one login. As an example, a file server, that's OT, and that file server is there for the like engineering workstation that's got something like RS Studio, or Unity, sitting on the engineering side. So you log into that and use the domain controller and file server to get files up and down. So it's more like kind of like IT technology, but used for operations, right? That's sort of where the OT fits. Now, industrial control systems, also known as industrial automation control systems, depending on what standard you read, those I typically refer to as embedded HMIs, and like a panel view, where the software is embedded. You can't really update it that much. You have to update the firmware. PLC controls, instrumentation, transmitters, and so on and so forth. So like the Purdue model is generally what is used to describe stuff, and fundamentally most of the ICS stuff sits at level 2, 1, and 0. And if nobody's heard of the Purdue model, it's really hard to explain without a picture, but I'm sure you can do some Googling. So I'll just have to throw that out there. If you're unfamiliar with what I just said, check out a picture, just Purdue model on Google, and you'll get a rough idea. But level 3 and 3.5 is generally where you'll see the OT stuff.
And let me ask you maybe like a follow-up before I pass it on to Dave. So in terms of, I guess, configuring like specific devices, right? So if you start researching, obviously on that side, you start hearing about managed switches, and that's how actually you and I connected a little bit over a post I had made on LinkedIn. But you start talking about managed switches, you start talking about firewalls, you start talking about permissions. So as you maybe deploy some of these rule sets for some of the folks that maybe don't have I guess, a better picture, what type of equipment do you usually work on? Is it, is it servers that these clients have? Is it connecting to like workstations you mentioned? Is it, cloud servers, like in architecture? Like what does that usually involve?
Yeah, it depends. Basically, all of it. So it gets a bit weird in the sense that because I've come from a control system engineering or industrial automation background, I can do it all. Whereas most people in ICS or OT cybersecurity, they have typically come from the IT side, and they'll focus mostly on network switches and firewalls and servers and hypervisors, like the infrastructure side. Whereas I will probably also comment on like functional safety and what's missing there, and also like your PLC is capable of doing OPC UA reverse connect, right? Which is good because if you have a firewall in front of the PLC, pushing data out is the better way to go from a cybersecurity point of view. That means there's no connections coming in. Now, obviously, you got to engineer the PLC. That's fine. That's a business function. But the less stuff coming in is better as a principle. So
Interesting. Makes sense. Dave, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's interesting. I am not surprised to hear that you guys first connected over one of Vlad's managed switch posts. Gavin, and for all of our longtime listeners, you can always tell the difficult jobs that Vlad and I have come off of, because those are the things that we talk about kind of over and over again. And I'm not sure Vlad and I have talked about managed switches more in any of the past 5 years than we have in the first 6 or 7 months of this year. And that may or may not just be how honestly all of our projects are going this year, is that almost everyone just needs more managed switches, which I certainly will not go put that in your mouth, Gavin, as the ICS cybersecurity professional. I guess I would like to go ask, you had made the comment of kind of the difference of the person with the OT background versus the difference of the person with the IT background, and you had made the comment about how some people are going through and learning about protecting some of their assets. Is there a first step or a first 2 or 3 steps that you normally like to have the conversation around? This is where we should start, right? So if someone has either nothing or is looking for a little bit of a sanity check, are there a first 1, 2, 5 steps that you go through the process of looking at when you're looking at a new system or having a conversation around a new system?
yeah, we like to talk about a concept called technology, people, and process. Sometimes it's people, process, technology. It just depends how you want to phrase it together. But a lot of people focus on the technology and not enough on the people and process. So from the people side, it really is OT specific security awareness training. So I'm sure everybody can eye roll at the IT security test that everybody gets, like a phishing email, and if you click on it, you have to do more training, and like, don't do this. But the OT side, there's different risks, right? Like you kind of have to, you can do a general approach, but you also want to highlight the unique organizational risks of, we store methanol here, and that has consequences if we get loss of containment. Things like that. So it's not just phishing emails, because you shouldn't be getting emails in the OT environment. You can send them out, but getting them is not a good idea. But you focus on sort of, why is OT cybersecurity important? What's the impact? Like if somebody got in and started messing with stuff, what can happen? And we usually use cases like the Ukrainian power grid attack and Triton/Trisis, which is safety instrumented system got hacked. And there's use cases out there that you can pull from, but that sort of just tries to get people thinking about it. So that's the people. The process is documenting that people have done the training. So you go to your contractors and system integrators saying you need to do this too because it's important. And then finally we sort of go through the technology, which is like, what are some basic things we can put in place for you. Now this is where you divulge into some, what's the word? I'm trying to think of the phrase. It can go many different ways, but the basic steps are, when you get to a factory, a plant, you kind of need to start doing an asset inventory. It's like, well, what do you actually have? How is that connecting to one another? So you sort of draw a map, and then you just start highlighting the risks. So if nobody's ever done this before, you typically just start getting some vulnerabilities, looking for some vulnerabilities, which is, for those who don't know what that is, it's essentially finding weak points. So if I apply pressure to this weak point, what happens? It's like I gain control of that system. Okay, if I get control of that system, what can I do next? It's like I can attack other systems and then cause a process upset, that type of deal. And then you document that all and sort of put it back as findings. I typically measure against best practice, and then I fundamentally follow up with saying, now that you have this report, it has a roadmap of like short-term wins, like low-hanging fruit that you guys should be able to do within 6 months, to like long-term, a year to, mid-term to like a year, 18 months, and then long-term, which is like 2 to 3 years. That's generally how I approach it. But asset owners really tend to struggle with the security awareness and the asset inventory stuff. They kind of want to just get like a quick, like, just go find my assets, like, and you can't beat pen and paper, like literally going panel to panel, writing it down. How do I log into it? I can't. It's not a managed switch. Okay, unmanaged switch, right? And then on to the next panel. What have I got? That's the best first step. People would disagree with me on that one, but generally I found that if you're starting out, that's the easiest, because you could probably grab an electrician on shift, at night shift, who's got nothing to do, and say, can you please go find this information? That type of approach. So I rambled for a bit.
No, I appreciate that, Gavin. Vlad and I have had probably that exact same conversation several times already over the course of this year, down to the electrician. In fact, having said that, you had made the comment over the last decade or so, there's been significantly more information available education-wise. Are you seeing attitudes of those asset owners change as there's more and more in the news ransomware attacks, ransomware instances, or are you seeing kind of that attitude is similar to the, yes, we should do something, but there are so many steps, or it's going to be so expensive, and it's still not a priority? I would love to know what that trend of conversation looks like.
Yeah, I mean, like if you're talking about like North America and the energy sector, they've had NERC SIP for a while, so they're pretty mature. I'm sure there'll be debates about that, but if you are looking at organizations where this is like all new to them, the attitudes have definitely changed, especially from the IT. It used to be that you would go in and start talking about OT stuff, and the IT guys are like, you have to do it our way. Our way's the secure way, and there's no other. And now they're like, actually, we've looked some things up, and we realize that OT is different, and we can't do the things that we normally do in the IT environment. So that attitude has changed, which is a massive help, because there's a lot less in-house fighting. It still exists, but normally that's, once again, an awareness piece that just has to, you generally have to educate them again that cybersecurity in IT and OT is about managing risk. You don't do all the things, you don't secure it down to the nth degree. There's trade-offs, okay? So you've got to go for that risk sort of portion. Now, as for the executives and leadership allocating the correct amount of budget and tackling it, I think my ex-CEO, who I used to work for, Edgar, kind of phrased it the best. He said, if you can imagine you're a CEO of a company and you've got like 5 children, and you've got your budget, and you've got IT and HR, and and then suddenly there's this OT baby just pops out of nowhere. You're like, what the, now you've got to allocate budget to it. But the only way you can do that is to take away from the others. But if you take away from the others, you've introduced risk. So what do? It's first few years is very, very chaotic and not ideal, because they going, well, we paid for a penetration test in the IT department that cost 10 grand. Let's do that in OT. And then they get an invoice for like 60 grand. And they're like, well, why is this so different? It's like, well, because it's a different environment. You have to take different steps. There's different precautions and so on and so forth. So again, the education piece, the awareness piece, although a lot of stuff is is out there. There's still confusion at the leadership and executive sort of level as to how much this stuff actually costs. Because you're starting from ground zero. There's typically no foundation. So you've got to build the foundation first, and that costs a lot of money to get going, unfortunately.
If I can add to your points, Gavin, I think for me what's been really interesting, besides the market pressures, is also what we saw happen in Europe. And I'm not overly familiar with all the legislation, but ultimately this basically means that you're now mandated to have cybersecurity premiums, right? So just like with home insurance or car insurance, you're basically paying for the risk of having downtime as a result of a breach. And so what I've seen, at least, is the increase in those premiums based on the number of attacks that have happened, right? And so if you're a manufacturer with, I want to say, assets that are obsolete for 10, 20 plus years, you're going to be basically just like in, living in a flood zone for your home, you're going to be paying higher premiums. And so now there's a delta in budget that you can immediately put towards, hey, we need to modernize or replace or put firewalls or put configurations that will then show and demonstrate to the the underwriter of that policy that, hey, we've taken the necessary steps, therefore we should have a lower premium. So
it's unfortunately, insurance is one of those murky places where it sounds good in theory, but unfortunately the execution is not what you think it is. So you go to the insurance and the underwriter, and you're like, okay, I'm a plant, I have assets. It's okay, cool. Do you have patching? Do you do this? It's like, yes. And then you go to the OT side. It's like, do you do these things? It's like, no. And then they're like, okay, well, what's the impact of if those things happen? Like the assets get taken out. The answer is we don't know. So then it's like, you need to go pay money to find out. And then once you have that, what typically happens is the impact is far, far, far greater than they originally anticipated for the asset owner. So the underwriter then goes, okay, we have been insuring you for like $100 million for the past 20 years. We are now going to insure you for $800 million. And that is a significant jump upwards.
Yep.
Because they haven't actually taken into consideration the cyber physical aspect of it could invoke health and safety issues, environmental issues and regulations, the equipment. You take out like a transformer. What is there, like a 3-year wait list for a transformer delivery? It's like, okay, they blew that up. We'll just get another one. It's like, well, we got paid out from insurance, but see you in 3 years. So insurance very, very hard to risk transfer. But the reality is also any sort of constitutional attack on a physical asset can invoke an act of war clause, and which is like an act of God clause, and that still hasn't been tidied up. There's been some things that have settled out of court, but there's still some vague confusion on there. Honestly, I think you could, if you were an insurer, you could spend your next 30 years, an entire career on just how to do OT insurance, because it's an absolute wild guess at the moment.
And I would 100% agree with that, right? I don't pretend to understand all the details of underwriters and that goes into some of their risk assessments, right? I think it's just everybody's realizing that there's more, I want to say, breaches, there's more downtime, which means that, insurance is going to go up and someone needs to come in. And as you said, it's not an easy game where, we discussed a couple of tools that make it a little bit easier to detect some of your assets a little bit off stream, but ultimately it still requires a fairly manual approach because, we have a lot of different networks on the OT side that are obviously documented, but proprietary and don't allow certain messages to go through. And if anything, they are the most problematic ones. And there's a lot of nuances involved on that side as well. So I think it's going to be interesting. Like I said, I'm probably going to have to read up more about the legislature that passed in Europe to see how it's going to, I guess, convert to the North American side. But I can tell you from, I guess, my own experience, there's definitely a lot more concern when it comes to ICS in a general sense in North America.
Yeah, I think that. Oh, you go, Dave.
I was going to say, I was going to go add another example of the NIS2 that is happening or in the process of happening in Europe and being rolled out. I don't have the specific the specific name, but 7 or 8 years ago in the U.S. for the water wastewater for a bunch of those public resources, there was mandates by the EPA or by the federal government to go through and do this cybersecurity auditing and processing. And so there was some thought of this is going to be the first of those opportunities to go in and have those cyber physical assessments, as you mentioned, Gavin. And then fairly quickly after that, it came out and basically said they were going to let all of these public utilities and all of the utility companies go self-report, right? And so it's like, do you do patches? Do you do all of these things? And I'd imagine the vast majority of them are saying yes, even if they are not even close to what was the anticipated desire of those questions.
Yeah, I've done a lot in obviously Australia, New Zealand, and bits of the UK, and so there's things called like maturity indicator levels, and so the higher the number, the more mature you are. And the amount of times I've gone to do an assessment, and they're like, "We're Bill 3, the highest maturity indicator level," and within about 20 minutes, I'm like, "Right, so you're Bill 0." I found like egregious infractions, and they're not just one-offs; they're everywhere. So self-reporting is optimistic at best, unfortunately. Mandatory reporting, I don't think it's actually going to help. Realistically, people just want to know what they have to do and then how they're going to do it. So it's great to have like NIST frameworks and standards, and it gives you general advice. The problem is a lot of people get stuck with, right, I've got this document that covers energy and water and waste and manufacturing and pharmaceuticals and how do I make it fit for me? And that seems to be the biggest disconnect I find. Is a lot of good stuff can be done, but a lot of people struggle of not just how to start, but when it comes down to implementing security controls and countermeasures, they still are like, what do I actually do? What does that actually look like?
Let me ask you a follow-up on that side, Gavin, right? And obviously without mentioning any specific customer names, what are, I want to say, some of the biggest challenges you've seen, or maybe some of the biggest mistakes you've seen on that side, if you're able to speak to that?
Yeah, we could extend this podcast for the next 20 hours straight. So, but no, like the biggest infractions generally is the lack of awareness, not just from the security sense, like the cybersecurity OT awareness, the training, but also from a they believe that their setup is this, like it's this way, and there's no connections in, and then you walk around and you find like a 3G modem plugged in, and you're like, you said your borders were secure. They are not secure. People are coming in and out of that OT environment. So that seems to be one of the most common ones. Is not what you think it is, and then a lot of the basics is not understanding that vulnerability management, i.e. patching, not understanding that you patch all the things, right? So when it comes to OT, you typically can't, you're not going to update a PLC firmware. Anyone who's updated PLC firmware knows that the vendors, not, well, when I update PLC firmware, I like to do it on a dodgy internet connection and low battery, right? But yeah,
on a Friday
whole
night, let's finish
Friday
it, Gavin.
night.
A late Friday night, maybe early Saturday morning, you come back in.
Yes, that's exactly it. But yeah, PLC firmware updates, like you get all these CVEs, and CVEs are like common vulnerability. Oh, was it enumeration? Oh, I can't even remember. It's just, you just go by the term CVE, and it's basically saying this is a vulnerability and it has this risk score. Well, unfortunately, and there have been efforts to fix it, usually inflated and doesn't actually cause an impact in OT. Right now, that can be dangerous grounds if someone basically heard that and doesn't understand the context. So let me tell you a story. Industrial firewall, so didn't rail mount firewall. I was in a plant some years ago, and the CISO said this vendor has just been announced by CISA, Center for Information Security Agency. I think I got that right. And they've released CVEs that are all like 9.9, 9.8, 9.7, you know, red, critical, patch now. You've got to patch now. We're in danger, patch now. And me, having done penetration testing, I just casually sent an email back saying, we don't expose our web port to the IT environment. So, and this was before COVID, so there was no remote access. That was a policy for that organization. So for you to get down to the OT environment or ICS environment, you either A, had to be physically on site there, or B, you've managed to hack one of the protocols at the top of IT that's connecting to OT and then come back down. Now, in either of those circumstances, if you were a hacker, you'd probably find that the domain password was administrator and password administrator. That was the risk. There is no reason to attack the firewall. You've got everything already. So, you know, it's sort of like, yes, these CVEs come out, but you don't just patch for the sake of it. So in OT, we apply a risk-based approach to patching. And what that essentially means is you go through the exercise of what is the actual impact. If someone exploited it, how are they going to exploit it? Can they actually get to it? Do we have any other compensating controls? Like, I mean, is monitoring or signatures going to pick up this attack? If so, then we've got stuff in place that will mitigate it. And then you go through the process of that and then come out with, you know, a decision, basically. It's like, no, let's not patch. Whereas I think Ripple 20 was an RTU vulnerability in the TCP IP stack. And that means the protocol was actually broken. So a lot of like organizations went, no, we don't really have a choice. We have to schedule some downtime and patch each RTU to make sure that it can't be exploited. So, you know, it's just a risk-based approach essentially for that. Just don't patch all the things.
And it's super interesting. Yeah. Sorry to interrupt. I thought you had finished your thought. I think it would be super interesting to see some more data on, again, the types of attacks, but ultimately, you know, who are the weakest links, because it sounds to me like it's not always technical, right? So obviously you mentioned the people process technology framework, but if I was to, I guess, think of some of the attacks that I've read about, a lot of times it is social engineering, right? It is open networks that someone can just connect into. But I've not personally seen, I guess, a vast amount of data for, I guess, reasons that I understand, that would indicate, you know, what are the main sources of threats or vulnerabilities, because yes, a lot of the devices, it's documented what the problems are, right? So it's super interesting.
Yeah. I mean, the types of attacks you hear about, they're either super sophisticated, like the Ukrainian power grid, or they're super easy, like people just coming in with the default passwords. And changing default passwords is great, but it's like how you're going to manage those passwords. And then if you look at passwords management solutions, you know, it's like, okay, well, I'm not paying 20 grand a year just to have a password management solution, because those are typically IT products that think, you know, like the way that IT structures its enterprise, like, well, let's charge by admin. Well, it's like, well, all of our control system engineers need to be admin. So they're like, okay, well, let's charge by, you know, protocol count or whatever. What we found is with password management or even PAM, it typically that's privileged access management. So it's a like next level up type thing in terms of technology. Even those things are sort of like, well, we can't really justify the cost just to have password. So a lot of people end up with something like KeyPass. At least that encrypts the database with the passwords in it. My dad used to work in physical security, so he would go out and audit and assess, you know, access control, and is the CCTV cameras in place? Are they actually going to capture enough data? So it's like, you know, the requirement is 90 days worth of recordings, and the camera's that high resolution that you only get 4. you know, basic things like that. But one of his favorite stories is like opening one of the secure doors. The door had been propped up 200 times, and they had logging and they had monitoring, and you could see the alarms, but no one ever looked at it. And another one is keys, right? Managing your keys, much like managing your passwords. You can give someone a key, but this organization said, here's the secure key to the secure stuff, but if you lose it, we will charge you $200. And so what would they do? They'd grab the key, they'd go down to Walmart or Mitre 10 here, they get the key cut, they get the registered key, they put that somewhere safe, so when they can't lose it, and then when they leave, they hand the key back in, and now you've got a boatload of uncontrolled keys that everybody has access to, all because they introduced a $200 fine. And that's that, again, people and process. The process isn't working, and people will find a way around it to make sure that they don't suffer. So yeah, basic attacks happen because of these sorts of miscommunications, if you will.
Speaking of physical keys, we do have an interesting question on the chat. So let me bring this up. So Matthew is asking, what's the opinion on physical token systems as viable way for controlled access? And I'm assuming, and Gavin, correct me if I'm wrong, he's referring to, like physical authenticator, I guess like electronic keys that you need to plug in or either have like a change in code to protect your device. I've not seen that on the OT side, so I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, it gets really complicated really, really fast. So let's say you're a DCS vendor. DCS vendor's got to certify that those physical token systems are going to work. I don't think I've seen one even look at implementing that. So that's out for DCS systems. Okay, PLC SCADA, RTU type stuff. Potentially, however, it really comes to an organization. So for me, I worked in a dairy factory, I had to have the hairnet and the beard mask, and same with pharmaceutical and the thing. And getting something out to tap on the screen to log in is a massive problem. So then people are like, okay, well, we can do the same thing, but it can do facial recognition. Well, that's been terrible, and it's also, I find personally, probably because I'm a cybersecurity guy, as a breach of privacy, like they're recording, face and biometrics. If you think about like wet areas, it's like fingerprints are out because, and then you've got like dealing with diluted acid, so that you can't pick up the skin, the bumps. So that's also out. So there's all these problems. And then you've got to take into consideration that a lot of these sort of key fobs are based on certificates. So now you've got to do OT public key infrastructure. And if you look at public key infrastructure with an OT, so your eyes are immediately going to roll back. There's like 10 million ways you can configure that, and the fault analysis, root cause analysis of what happens if that thing doesn't work is diabolical. Then you've got to teach people to troubleshoot how to. It's a nightmare. So could you do it? Yes. Would you do it? Only like super mature organizations would be able to implement it. Hopefully that answered his question. Yeah.
I have.
Morning, Phil. Sorry.
Absolutely. There we go. Morning, Phil.
Morning.
And Oxkin is listening in Sydney. So everyone is up early. We were just talking to Gavin how much earlier it is in Australia than it is in New Zealand, even though for all of us North Americans, it looks much closer. It is deceptively close on the map. It is deceptively close. It is deceptively close on the map. I have seen like RFIDs on the way of physical token systems or physical keys. That probably works the best of what I've seen. Probably 8 or 9 years ago, I saw this very intricate system from Siemens where they were probably, I don't know, 4 inches or 10 centimeters worth of like pins that get pushed into the physical piece of hardware as identifiers, and each of them were different colors. I have never physically seen that out in the wild, but lots of RFIDs. I don't know, we could probably shake my work bag and find 4 or 5 badges from different facilities with different RFIDs, all of which need to potentially be returned. No, I think the concept of those make more sense. Again, I agree with Gavin's point of like the physical key. The physical key is unlike you go rent in an apartment and they tell you the exact same thing of, hey, if you lose this key, we're going to go charge you $200. And so the first thing you do is you go to the hardware store and you make 8 copies of it, so you can't possibly lose all of them, and like tape that one somewhere, so a year or two later when you leave, then you actually will say, why do I have 6 keys left? But kind of similar along that line of the monetary side is going to, at the end of the day, go reduce that. And the physical key is like a physical key, or a physical token like a key. You're going to go run into some unintended consequences of people, especially people who lose things quite often.
Me being one of them. I should phrase this a bit. There's a caveat, because when I read that question, or the question was read out loud, I immediately went to how to log into an operator workstation, how to log into a server, a firewall. You absolutely use RFID and access tokens for rooms. I need to go to the server room, normally those systems are not built into, but for a plant, an industrial plant, you will have like a BMS, building management system network, and access control and physical control usually connects into those sort of things, or slightly separate. So that's a different infrastructure. And yes, you can definitely do those physical tokens, RFID, for building and room access, 100%.
Yeah, it's an interesting dilemma, right? I was gonna like make the comment on that side because it almost seems like there's 3 things, right? So there's obviously like physical access to doors and areas. Then there's the access maybe to engineering workstations, which are basically like laptops given out to, engineers and whomever. And then there's the actual, let's say, PLCs and DCS systems, which, as both of you know, should be, in, let's say, like run mode, so you cannot push any changes to them, but are usually in remote run because everyone wants to connect remotely and make whatever changes. So yeah, it's an interesting dilemma.
Yeah, that's a remote remote run. Fantastic control, basic control to stop people from. Now, some vendors, their remote run or remote program is actually software. So you can send a TCP/IP packet to flick it back, which makes the key on the PLC redundant, like a waste of time. But for the vendors that does work, it's a great control. As an industrial automation engineer, I kind of hate it because it means a 40-minute walk in the rain to go register the key out, to then go in and plug it. And then it's sort of like, then I've got my keys in my pocket, where it's like, I'll fill out the register later, which is, again, people in process bypassing security controls. That's all these things you've got to take into factor. So
Absolutely. If I may, Gavin, we had kind of talked a little bit earlier about the debate of OT and IT, right? And who has ownership, or to a large extent, I really like the analogy of every CEO has 5 kids, and then there's the baby that pops out, and the baby is very demanding, and it's like, hey, you guys haven't paid attention to me for the last 50 years, so I want to go steal as much of your budgets as possible to, do some of this modernization. So talking about the OT and the IT, and who owns what from the cybersecurity perspective, are you seeing, a larger and larger debate when it comes to that? Are you seeing the teams working together? What have, I suppose, let's start at general trends. What are you seeing on the general trend side of IT and OT? Is it still a fight?
The smaller the organization, the generally more likely you'll find them working together. So what it is, I guess, the smaller the org, the less likely the control system and automation engineers have the IT skills to maintain any infrastructure being put in. Like they didn't get into control system engineering to, configure VMware or Hyper-V or, that type of stuff. So the smaller orgs generally get along. When you start getting to the older ones, yes, there are turf wars. But fundamentally, anything level 3.5 on the Purdue model below is OT territory. Now, you might sort of get a service level agreement from your IT department to say, you are looking after the DMZ. It's our stuff, but you are looking after it and giving us advice. And when there's a stuff up, you are reporting to the operations manager as to why you messed everything up. Without that reporting structure, IT have gotten away with a lot over the years because they report to the CIO, the Chief Information Officer. So everything sort of goes down that channel. And realistically, when you come down to our territory, you need that sort of accountability so that it's very, very clear that if they stop the plant from functioning, there will be consequences, obviously for the plants and production, but for themselves as well, misconduct in that. And when you start putting in those sort of frameworks, it is a bit of the stick rather than the carrot, but they're far more aware of their actions rather than just doing what they usually do. A lot more questions get asked, a lot more, are you sure? As for the carrots, I have seen numerous people from IT jump the fence to OT, and they're like, this is the most fun I've had in years. OT is amazing. You make stuff move, and and they just find it all rather exciting how our process works. So that's the carrot.
Interesting. If anything, I've heard the opposite of a sentiment because they get worried as to how, open things are and how, as we discussed a little bit earlier, some of the corners are cut in, the different or vast protocols that OT kind of has. But yes, if they're obviously passionate about seeing things transforming from electrical to mechanical process science, it is the place to be.
Well, I should caveat that as well. If it's a security guy that hasn't done any sort of OT training whatsoever, they're in for a rude awakening, and their first response is to freak out. It's kind of like getting the stages of grief. They get angry, and then that sort of, and then eventually they realize that this is normal, and they can do basic things to actually bring the risk down considerably. Like I said, implementing that industrial DMZ, demilitarized zone, and having all the data flow through it. It's a fantastic way of reducing your risk. Some people say IDMZ doesn't really exist. It's old way of doing things. The modern way is just calling it a zone. It's a security zone. If you want to get down to OT, you have to go through the zone, much like border control. You're going through customs, and there will be questions, type thing.
Let me ask you a follow-up on Dave's question to expand a little bit, right? So I'm, at least personally, am seeing a lot of budgets for OT types of, hey, we need to get this a little bit better together, come from the IT side, right? And so that also creates, I would say, certain tensions, because at that point, IT is to some extent pushing down best practices that they know onto teams that don't necessarily agree with all of them. So I'm curious, I guess, when you're talking to some of the people in, your projects or your circles, are you also seeing IT sort of pay for a lot of these types of initiatives? Do you see OT taking charge? Do you see them maybe generate and taking more lead on some of these implementations, or is it similar to what I've described?
Yeah, basically the IT pushing down, and the policies and procedures and some of the stuff they're trying to do doesn't have that OT context. So, when they say, like, we will encrypt all the things, it's like, well, you're not, because you have a PLC that's 20 years old that can't do encryption. And so making things clearer to the OT team what you're actually trying to achieve, and that some things are just aspirational. So, like, we know you're like 90% of the time you're not going to be able to hit this, but we're trying to get it. So when we go to tender and an OEM is bringing stuff in, we can go, look, policy, the new equipment needs to comply. That's really what it's about. One of the best things you can do is, as part of your supply chain, if you're buying anything new, is make sure there's cybersecurity clauses in there, and you've really got to be specific of what you want. And what that generally means is you stop bringing vulnerable stuff into the environment. That's a big deal. But what I see is people who do the supply chain clauses, like, if we're going to tender, they need to be able to produce this level of security. They just say do IEC, which is the international standard for securing an OT ICS environment, right? And that could mean anything. There's like 15 documents in 62443, so it doesn't actually make sense. So you kind of need to actually have someone come in and say, well, actually, you more want to focus on the -4 or the 3-2 series. Make sure that they're meeting their risks obligations. But yeah.
Yeah, let me, I guess, bring up maybe the next point before I pass it on to Dave, right? So again, I think talking about getting started, you made the comment a little bit earlier that sometimes it is difficult to realize all the mistakes you've made in the past and sort of, turn a blank page and figure out what is next. So as someone is either on OT or IT side, maybe what kind of resources, what kind of knowledge do you typically recommend? You and I talked a little bit, before the stream about the CISSP book that I have sitting behind me that I probably should read more of, but I wanted to get your perspective, like what are some of the starting points, maybe good references and resources to learn as well for both sides.
Yeah, well, the one of the fundamentals for OT and ICS securing it is generally how things talk to one another. So even when I was just an engineer, like an industrial automation engineer, I'd have apprentices or junior engineers who I'm training up. They're like, what do I need to focus on as a control system engineer or aspiring control system engineer? And I said every time, TCP/IP networking. And they're like, but we mostly do Profibus. I was like, learning TCP/IP networking will help you troubleshoot Profibus. You'll learn how things communicate, how collision detection works, how, all these things. And the biggest problems I have is this has been talking to this for 20 years, and it just stopped randomly on a Friday afternoon, and we have to figure out why. And you learn things like terminating resistors are really, really important those Friday nights. So yeah, the biggest thing for those apprentices was they thought it would be like PID tuning, the dark arts of that, or like learning like high performance HMI, the standard for that, like the different colors, or alarm management. It was like, no, man, like if you're in control system, configuring PLCs, writing SCADA, the best skill you can have is learning TCP/IP networking, and that's from a troubleshooting point of view and getting stuff working. But from a cybersecurity point of view, that's where you start, because it's all communication. Like, how does the system talk to this system? How do we secure it so that nothing else can actually talk to it? That's a basic concept that you can start with. So from that, generally, I recommend doing a basic networking course like CCNA, CompTIA, Network Plus. Do you sit the exams and get the certs? Depends. You actually have to do some research within your country to see if it's worth it. If you got CompTIA Network Plus, for example, that works really well in North America and the UK. It doesn't work anywhere else in the world. Nobody cares if you've got that certification. So it's a waste of time for you to actually sit the exam. Learning the material, great, but actually getting the exam, getting certified, not so much. But yeah, so Cisco, CompTIA. Vendors are doing certs, like Schneider has a networking for their switches, and Moxa, for example, has a networking associate thing. So if you've got a lot of Moxas in your environment, go do those. How expensive they are, I can't tell you. I don't know, but if that's where I'd start from a basic level as an industrial automation engineer or control system engineer, because then you can pivot to cybersecurity quite easily. And I believe I've heard good things, never seen it, but Trace Routes, Josh Vargas' course, he's got a networking course. I've heard good things about it. So I'd recommend, if you're in the States, to check that out as well. But I'm just thinking I've got a few books as well that I'd recommend. Now, this is I'm holding it up to the screen, so sorry if you're just listening. There's a third edition. I'm holding up the second edition. It's Industrial Network Security by Eric D. Knapp. The third edition, I'd recommend reading that. And the other one would be Security Process Hazardous Analysis Review. Now, if you do functional safety or machine safety, a lot of times people haven't looked at the cybersecurity implications. So this book, doesn't matter if you're from IT or OT or you've never done safety, it will teach you how to go through HAZOPs and LOPAs and actually highlight what could mitigate the actual safety controls you've put in place. So the whole point of these safety instrumented systems is that to keep people in the environment, nice and safe. And if a hacker could come in and bypass those, then you thought you were secure and safe, and you're actually not. So that's probably the first thing I do, is ask for HAZOPs and LOPAs when I'm engaged in an assessment, because there's a lot of quick wins there. And that's mostly because functional safety engineers were never taught how to secure things. It's not their fault. Like they don't think of it that way. So, I'm always going to find something there, and that'll probably be like that for the next 10, 15 years. So I'd highly recommend getting that book from ISA, Security, Process Hazards Analysis Review, Consequence-Based Cybersecurity by Edward Marzell and Jim McGlone. So
I think that's a new recommendation. In fact, both of those might be new recommendations. So thank you for that, Gavin. This is the point in time where I commit Vlad to going to put the links to those below in the show notes for all the listeners, or mostly just so Vlad and I can go figure out which new books we should go through the process of reading. So thank you for that, Gavin. I want to go back and talk about a little bit more about the certifications. And I feel like you brought up a really good topic. And it's a topic that at least one Vlad or I go ask our guests talking about certifications. Right. So the knowledge is important, right? And I think we can all agree that the knowledge and if you have all of the time to be able to go through all of the information and do all of the studying, or if you're looking to transition careers, going and having that knowledge is exceptionally important. I guess from your background as a senior in the cybersecurity side, from your perspective, do you care if people have these certifications? Do you care more so about the knowledge and are less worried about, the certification on the resume? I guess give us your thoughts on that, if you wouldn't mind, please.
Yeah, like there was a time where if you just had SANS GICSP, which is Industrial Control System Cybersecurity Cert, if you just had that would probably get you a job, which is a bit like questionable, but it's pretty dire back then. These days, people are expecting experience with those certs, so the certs alone are useless. You really do need experience. If I'm looking at a CV, I'm really looking at the years. I don't mind if they haven't done a certification, because you can, as a senior, I can quickly figure out if they've done stuff or not by asking the right questions. Places like Nozomi Networks, for example, who hire some of the best OT people in the world, much like Dragos and Clarity. But I know firsthand, because I used to work for Nozomi, they make you analyze a PCAP manually. So what is, from a Y-shot PCAP, what is on the network? What has happened? Who's talking to who and what industrial protocol? Now, if you're securing a network, you need to know a bit about industrial protocols. You don't need to know this function code means write, and that stuff kind of doesn't really help you. It does when there's a requirement from a customer that we want to secure our Modbus connections via function codes. Rarely happens, but that's when you can do a deep dive. But 99% of the time, you fundamentally just need to know this talks to this in this protocol. This protocol behaves this way as a general concept. Like OPC UA servers and OPC UA clients, the clients connect to the server, typically, unless you've done a reverse connection where the server connects to the client, which is, again, great from a firewall perspective. So knowing that you have that capability is part of the problem, or part of what you are supposed to know as a security engineer. As for things like CSSP, CISSP, it's a complete waste of time. It is very much a IT cert and doesn't really translate well down here. You do need OT specific training. But I would say most people, if you're looking to jump ship, they're really looking for experience. So maybe as an IT person, you've had to look after the historian server. Right, that's the first step. Now all you have to do is start going down to the control room and start talking to operators and engineers and ask them what are the problems they're seeing you can do to help. So remote access could be an absolute nightmare. And then you could be a champion for remote access into OT to make it streamlined and easier for people. You know, bringing donuts, or maybe I was about to say beer, but beer in a control room usually doesn't go down well. So after work, after off shift, yeah, try that instead. But if you come
The
from
cooler
IT
of
and
beer outside, yes.
yeah, yeah, you want nice cold beer, cool everybody down in summer. Maybe warm honey mead in winter. It just depends where you are. But from the OT side, essentially you're already in the environment, so it's a matter of doing the opposite, going to IT saying, if you were to secure this, how would you do it? And then researching it, and then implementing, writing a policy, for example, from an OT perspective. You're like, this is what IT says I should do. This is what I think happens in the environment, and having that conversation. You can get experience. And that's the sort of thing that I'd go for, is you have to make the extra effort yourself to go get that. If you're an IT guy that is working for like an accounting firm, securing their environment, there's no OT there. You're going to have to get to a place that does OT stuff and then progress. So hopefully that has helped.
Before we wrap up, there was I guess an important point. As we discussed, there's a very important, or I guess significant, push towards UNS, right? And this is passing data and storing data, and obviously as a result of it, a lot more connectivity, a lot more networks are being deployed for manufacturers of different sizes, right? So I guess I wanted to get your perspective on maybe what you're hearing, seeing, maybe best practices, maybe issues that can result from UNS. Just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah. I need to sort of caution that I sort of came across UNS in about 2019. I bought a PLC Next, and I was like, I need to figure out how to program this. It's very different. And then I came across like in Industry 4.0 Solutions YouTube channel. So I'm still learning about UNS. So, but from a cybersecurity perspective, one of the biggest defensive maneuvers you can do is unplug the OT network. It's sort of like we've got a hen house and we've got a hen pen. So the pen covers the house, and it's like wire mesh to keep the chickens out. And now wolves are at the inside the pen. You close the hen house so that the chickens are in the hen house. They're protected. The wolves can't get in. Right? You deal with the wolves, you get them out of there. Then you can open the house out and let them into the pen. Right? That's the best analogy I could think up on the fly. I'm sure I'll get grilled for it later. But anyway, the child grilled chicken. The analogy of why you disconnect, which has its own problems, I'll get into that in a minute, but the why you disconnect part is that it is a very, very easy maneuver that a cleaner could do. Can you please swipe into the server room? There is a cable that is red that says pull in cyber event. So unplug, you're now disconnected. Now, why does that matter for like a UNS? Well, UNS does quite a good job because normally you're using modern protocols like MQTT with TLS and OPC UA for a start. There are more. But those two, like I said, you can push out through a firewall. Now, if you've disconnected, you're no longer connected to the broker. So one of the things that you've got to keep in mind is, much like Colonial Pipeline, you should be able to reconnect and push that data up. So a UNS is that omnipresent on every level 2 here, there. So you should be able to have little pockets, be able to disconnect to isolate your most critical assets, plug back in and get that data back out. But UNS is mostly live data, it's not historical. So you need to factor that in to do that. Now, the security considerations are, there is such a thing as called malware detonation. So if you pull the plug and that heartbeat between the adversary has lost that connection, it's like they found us, the heartbeat's timed out, like detonate the malware and you get ransomware. Rare cases, most organizations will pull the plug anyway. They're like, it will take too long to figure out whether they've done that or not. but you need to factor that in as part of your decision. And the other security considerations you need to factor in is getting those protocols configured, and where are you going to put brokers, and how much is that going to cost, and pass that through. So the UNS sort of works in the sense that you've got that central hub, but I've got to also point out that all these connections going in and back out, and whatever protocol suits. But again, it's also omnipresent. So you can have a mini UNS here and a mini UNS there that feeds back up to the main UNS. And it's about, you've got to think about how you're going to, in a cyber event, get that data back up in there. That's the biggest talking point that I can sort of push out there and say it's important. Now, I might have that wrong, but that's my interpretation. And I hope someone can correct me or say, yep, that makes sense. I will also point out that there are people that are like, this whole disconnecting from OT is silly and it's not modern. And, people can do all these fancy isolation things. And it's like, okay, where are those people doing those? It's like, oh, Amazon and Tesla. And you're like, okay, Amazon and Tesla pay their cybersecurity staff like $400,000 a year. Like, that's like the entire 10-year budget of most manufacturing environments for cybersecurity. So it's sort of like that's why I advocate for an IDMZ sort of pull the cable, because anybody can do it. It's a basic maneuver, and you can set that up correctly. Hopefully that answered the question.
Mm-hmm. Awesome, appreciate it.
I like it. Now the only image I have in my mind is like a perfect is a perfect server room full of server racks, and then just like one loose red cable with the flag that says yank in case of emergency, and then the cleaners walking through twice a week. And I'm over here just hoping that they don't get it accidentally, like with the mop handle. But no, I like that. I like that analogy, Gavin. Thank you so much. As we are getting to the end of the conversation, I do want to make sure we get to go ask you questions that we ask all of our guests, although I will say you've already given fantastic career advice and book recommendations. We'll go ask you again to see if you had anything else in there and prepared. But first, before we go do that, I want to ask what I think is, well, both one of my favorite questions, but also like the scariest to ask a cybersecurity personnel is to go predict the future. Most of the time, they're absolutely terrifying. Having said that, Gavin, can you give us cybersecurity or your industrial cybersecurity predictions for the next 2 to 3 years, please?
Skynet, no. The one of the predictions I would say is that a lot of security tools like Clarity and Dragos or Nozomi networks and Tenable and stuff is that they do anomaly detection based on machine learning. Right, what does that mean? It means they baseline your plant saying this is usually 77 degrees Celsius or Fahrenheit, whatever, and it sort of fluctuates to 80 and then to 60 down. If you go over those points that it's learnt, it will raise an anomaly flag saying someone could be messing with your process. Right, so it's not AI, it's machine learning. Right, just to be clear, and it's very simple supervised machine learning that these products use. Now, with the event of people like collecting data and then normalizing it, which means like a 0 and 1, so that because you can't compare 4-bar with like 20 degrees, doesn't make sense. You've got to actually compare apples with apples for this to work. So once people have collected the data and normalized it, ideally you would actually then be able to create that baseline for anomaly and then apply cybersecurity to that. Because realistically, when someone hacks into an OT environment and messes with a PLC, it's really the process that they're messing with. Like that's the weird things. Like people ask me, well, how would you attack like an OT environment? It's like, oh man, I'd make all the PIDs oscillate. So, like it wouldn't get you straight away. You might not notice it, but like give it 2 years and you would have wrecked something, guaranteed. So bit of an evil genius like thought exercise. That's picking that sort of stuff up. like if you've got a baseline to compare to, this is what good looks like. Someone's messing with you. I think that's where we're going to go. Will we get there within 2 to 5? I think there will be the first surfaces of that. Will it be common? No, I think it's going to take probably 10 years to actually have a common architecture that can actually support that. But then I'm also well aware that, you know, that PLC5 that should have been ripped out 20 years ago is probably still going to be there. And, you know, you've got to account for that architecture as well. That might not be able to see the data needed to protect that process. So 2 minds. That's
what's wrong with PLC5s and massive data highway plus networks? Maybe people will forget how to hack those.
We'll just plug them into every available port on every available unmanaged switch, and then we'll just be able to go ping them all from the internet.
That's right.
As it once was, as it forever will be. No, Gavin, I think that in fact is a terrifying thought exercise that we will not go add to the final show notes of anyone who is perhaps not a cybersecurity professional of how would you go hack into a manufacturing facility and absolutely just wreak havoc, but just do it slowly so no one realizes until nothing works 36 months later. That is absolutely terrifying. So thank you for giving us more nightmare fuel. Vlad, we should really stop asking this question to ICS cybersecurity professionals because you, in fact, Gavin, are not even the first person to talk about Skynet. Having said that, so career advice. If someone has listened up until this point and they are interested in getting into cybersecurity on the OT side, maybe they do cybersecurity on the IT side, maybe they have other OT experience and are looking to get into cybersecurity, what's the best kind of early to mid-career experience or early to mid-career advice you would give?
I'd say network with other OT people. So just talk and where you can without NDAs, because NDAs you can talk openly, non-disclosure agreements. But if you are talking to people in the OT community, make sure you don't divulge too much information, but talk about your problems and see if they've solved it before. And you can get a lot of advice. Now that gives you 2 things: something for you to do and solve problems for the company you currently work at. Also, almost all the hires I have seen in OT have typically come from, I know a guy who knows a guy. It's not recruiters, and it's not through LinkedIn advertisement. So I know a lot of us are introverts, cybersecurity and engineers. It's one of those things where you're going to do yourself an absolute solid by just getting out more, going to industry groups, going to start talking to people, and just liaising with the OT community. You know, that's hopefully a bit fluffy, but honestly, that's the thing that's going to make the difference, to be perfectly honest.
Absolutely. I think that's a fantastic career or fantastic advice for anyone looking to do, I suppose, anything in the industry. I would also say, kind of to your earlier point, Gavin, as you made a really good comment of there's so much more information available in 2025 than there is in 2012. But unless people are writing blog posts about issues that they've had in the past so that they can Google it and find their own answers 5 years in the future, lots of things have been solved. It just hasn't been documented in a public way. So I think that is fantastic. And then I'm showing here you had some content recommendations for us. I know you had a couple of books. Did you have something else for us as well?
Well, I'll be releasing a basic OT cybersecurity course for free end of November. So I know that's a bit away, but you know, it's free and I reckon it's good. And for those that can see, it's to do with my process environment back there. Some tanks get hacked, and I'll show you all about that in the course. But other than that, like there's so many resources like GitHubs and Discord servers, and I just can't name them all. But there's plenty out there that can give you free resources, and engaging on those sort of chat channels, Slack and Discord and forums, you will get people engaging back with you. Like you ask a question, people will try and help you. So the ones that come to mind are Control Things in Discord and Cutaway Security. And yeah, that's all I can think of at the top of my head. And I've got a couple more books. This one's from ISA, Steve Mustard, Industrial Cybersecurity Best Practice. So from ISA, that's another great basic one. And then this is my favorite one for 62443 standard. So it's managing cybersecurity in the process industry, a risk-based approach. And it really dives into how functional safety and 6243 really work and the steps you'd carry out to conduct a risk assessment. So that'd be my recommendations for content.
No, I think that is fantastic. I think that is fantastic. I think a lot of those books, ISA and otherwise, I don't remember those being recommendations in the past. So thank you so excuse me, thank you so much for that, Gavin, and thank you so much for hanging out. I feel like this 75 minutes has gone so fast on a Wednesday, faster than even our normal conversations go, which always means that one, it was a good conversation, and two, we're going to have terrible nightmares about all of the things that are going to happen. But last question for you is, how can our listeners help? Who should reach out? Who are you looking to connect with? Kind of an open forum for you to ask anything of our listeners.
If you need help, feel free to ask. I work for Assessment Plus, which is my company, assessmentplus.co.nz. I'm happy to mentor people who want to get into OT cybersecurity, or have just started, or even if they're midway through their career. If you reach out and say, I need some career advice, I'm more than happy to help you as well. But the shameless plug, if you need any sort of design or architecture work for ICS or OT, obviously I can do that and bring in the cybersecurity aspects as well. So get in touch.
Absolutely. No, I think that is fantastic. Thank you so much, Gavin. And I guess last note is, if you let us know when your course comes out in November, we'll go make sure to post it with the episode, and we'll go make sure to post and let everyone know about what you've created. So, Gavin, thank you so much for being here and hanging out with us. Everyone, thank you so much for listening. If you're looking to connect with Gavin, and especially if you're watching on LinkedIn, which where most of you are, we've added Gavin as a speaker, and you guys can go ahead and connect with him to ask him questions or talk about any of those other things. I would say beyond that, we'll also go add Gavin's contact information, as we do for all of our guests in other format and in podcasts. Speaking of which, if you guys are watching on YouTube or podcast format or LinkedIn, please make sure to go follow along, follow Manufacturing Hub and Gavin and myself and Vlad. Give us the thumbs up, where you can go give us the thumbs up and rate us 5 stars in the podcast format. Vlad laughs, but the more I tell the podcast listeners to go do all of those things, the more people that listen to us in podcast format. Having said that hundreds of times at this point, I don't know why. But we do make a joke about it all at the end of almost every show. But Gavin, thank you so much for being here. And everyone, thank you so much for hanging out with us on Wednesday.